it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be chatting through my August wrap up. For the month of August, I'm actually, as I'm looking at all the books that I finished / started this month, there's more than I realized. So I have actually 7 books to chat about today, which I'm really excited about. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. I would say this month and probably the foreseeable future in terms of months, I'm really trying to focus on epic fantasy, finishing, starting, rereading a bunch of series that have been on my list for a very long time. It's just time to, start all the epic adventures that I possibly can while not leaving my house. Without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. So the first book I'm just going to quickly touch on, and that is The Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. I think I read the last 400, 300 pages of this month, and this is the third and final book to the Farseer trilogy, and I loved this. I personally thought this was a masterclass of character development and just a journey novel where you will sit and feel with all of the characters present within the story from start to finish. I know there are some fans of the series that feel the third one is a bit slow because there's definitely not a lot of action, but for me, seeing all of the characters just go through this journey together and the emotions, as well as kind of seeing the pieces finally culminate in a way that I just found so satisfying. I also feel like throughout the series, Robin Hobb isn't really hiding the villain, but instead of kind of evaluating how different characters are controlled by fate and kind of where they are positioned in society, we see this most strongly within Fitz. We follow him from book 1 through book 3, essentially the son of a prince born out of wedlock, let's say. And through the first one, we see him grow up from a young boy to a young man and finally into kind of an adult. And he's essentially trained as an assassin to be a tool of the crown throughout the entire series. And Fitz, as our main character, is reconciling with that the entire time, as he kind of has to confront loyalty to the greater whole, loyalty to his king, loyalty to the crown over his individual wants and needs. And because of this, you just watch him get crushed over and over and over again, and as a reader, you feel and fall in love with Fitz so much, and kind of seeing his evolution as a character culminating into this epic journey of a man just struggling to save everyone at the cost of everything was beautiful, and I loved this book so much. But it's also not just Fitz. I feel like Robin Hobb really does a deep dive of also looking at cost of being a king, a queen, just anyone who kind of has a position of power who wants to use it for good, which I think is important to call out here. And basically this selfless things individuals have to do in the cost of ruling to protect the many, often at the expense of your own personal relationships or your own personal needs in life, was just so well crafted throughout the story. It destroyed me and I felt so connected to everyone. I also feel like Robin Hobb's writing was amazing. It really got also a deep dive more into the magic within this story as well, but all in all, I loved this trilogy so much. I think this third one was actually my favorite. I felt the most connected to the characters in the story within this third one, though the first two I feel like were amazing and also perfect foundational books for the first one, the characters, and the second one, the world and the politics. But yeah, I loved this journey. I love Robin Hobb. I'm officially a fangirl. I gave this third and final book a 5 out of 5 stars. Would highly recommend this series so much. Robin Hobb knows how to write dynamic characters, not just main characters, but side characters. It is a journey. Speaking of emotions, I also read The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. This book, also incredible. I mean, seriously, 2 home runs hit by both of the authors that I started with this month, and I loved this so much. This, of course, basically takes place directly after the aftermath of the first novel, The Poppy War. And if you're not familiar, this is a grimdark Chinese history-inspired fantasy story with influences from the Song Dynasty, the Sino-Japanese War, as well as the Opium Wars. This is a very dark story, and primarily you follow your main character, Rin, who in the first novel is basically escaping poverty by gaining acceptance into this really prestigious military school. She's very much ostracized there for being a woman, for having a darker complexion, and for being poor, but she realizes she has this connection to magic, which kind of propels her into more of a politically important place, and throughout that book and this book you are at war. And I would say R.F. Kuang's focus of war is dark, but something I have always been very impressed with. This series deals very heavily with the true impact of war, as well as sort of the rock hard place decision making that many of these characters have to go through. There's no glory found in battle, there's no higher place found. You constantly are confronting the consequences of your actions, and those often result in civilian civilian deaths or other soldier deaths, and R.F. Kuang makes you confront those and realize that is what's going on. Obviously, Rin is a very complex and dynamic character. She's by no means perfect. In fact, throughout the first book and throughout most of the second book, you're really seeing her try to reconcile with a lot of things that she is hiding from. For the most part, Rin throughout the first 2 books in the series is basically hiding from the consequences of her actions, either relying on substances like drugs or becoming a soldier and just taking orders. That being said, this is an exceptionally crafted, military-focused fantasy series with deeply historic influences that just completely immerse you within this tale. It's very dark, it's multi-perspective, and there's definitely characters that you root for, but at the end of the day, everyone is very gray and human in that everyone is making mistakes and oftentimes are acting out of selfish impulse. Things about this sequel that I definitely enjoyed was the plot was more linear, not to say Poppy War wasn't, and I loved the Poppy War obviously, but this one had a very like focused linear plot line. You also got more in-depth view and strategy in terms of military planning, which I think is always really interesting. Something else that was definitely more heavily introduced within this book that I thought was so interesting from a historical perspective was the inclusion of some Western-based characters and basically how they are trying to take advantage of and assimilate within this war to essentially colonize from a distance. That was explored in a fascinating way, both from a political and a religious angle, and I'm really interested to see how that's going to expand within the 3rd book. But at the end of the day, I loved this book. It absolutely destroyed me. The combat, the characters, everything about it. I have no idea how the 3rd book is going to unfurl, and I can't wait for it. I would also just implore you guys before checking out this series that it does have a plethora of content warnings. For the ones that come top of mind, self-harm, sexual abuse, violence, substance abuse. Really keep that in mind before picking this book up, but at the end of the day, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was amazing. I loved this book so much. I can't wait for the 3rd book coming out later this year. It's going to be wild. All right, next book I'm going to chat about is definitely on the lighter end, a lot more wholesome, a lot more happy. So if you're reading some dark fantasy books like me, this book you should definitely pick up because it'll put a smile on your face, and that is The House on the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This essentially follows our main character Linus, who is a magical children social worker. His job is essentially go and visit orphanage, make sure that they're treating the children properly, rate them, pass it along to his bosses, and move on to the next one. He's very passionate about his job, he's very good at his job, but in terms of the structure of his life, he kind of just clocks in and clocks out, goes home, and doesn't really make any prolonged connections with anyone. Linus recognizes this, and while he definitely wished he had more connections in his day-to-day life, he also just thinks that he is someone who is kind of destined to be alone. Then enters a very unexpected assignment, and that is given to Linus by the extreme upper management to essentially evaluate a very unusual orphanage of magical children full of very dangerous children. He travels to this island. There he meets Arthur and a plethora of wonderful children from all different backgrounds. One of them is the son of the devil. And there you witness Linus, one, open himself up to like love and family, and you just meet all of these wonderful children who will just make you cry from happiness. You also witness the most delightful, charming romance between Linus and Arthur, and it will just put a smile on your face, warm your heart, melt you into a puddle of goo, and then reconstruct you, and then do it all over again. I cannot describe how charming this book is. It is delightful. It is funny. It is beautiful, and it also just has this sort of whimsical charm throughout the writing style as well. I would kind of liken it to sort of a Wes Anderson vibe. For example, like where Linus works, it's very bureaucratic almost to an extreme in a humor perspective, which someone who works in the corporate world, it was kind of funny to see how that played out. But then like everything about it was amazing. I don't know, seeing the children learn to love and trust, seeing Arthur learn to love and trust, seeing Linus learn to love and trust, it is just what you need. It will make you so happy. It is adorable. I don't even know if I'm being articulate right now, but 5 out of 5 stars. I cried like 5 times reading this over the smallest things. For example, one of the children in here wants to be a bellhop. That's his dream. And I cried when he did laundry once. It was a lot, okay? Buttons, I mean, records, everything you want. It's so charming. Read this book, please. It'll make you so happy. After I read that charming and happy book, I decided to pick up another gruesome war-centric fantasy novel, and that is The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. Going into this book, I'm not going to lie, I had extremely high expectations. I feel like everyone loves this. I was so pumped. I was ready to love it too. I personally love war-centric fantasy, and for the most part, I really liked this book, but there were a few elements that kind of let me down in the end ultimately. That being said, I would still highly recommend it, and I will be checking out book 2 to see if some of my issues are kind of dealt with. but let's chat about the book at large. So this, as I said, is a war-centric fantasy, and we follow our main character Tao, who lives in a world where his people about 183 years ago escaped their homeland from something called the Coal and arrived at a new place and essentially immediately began to wage war against the native peoples who've lived there, and ever since then this war has been unending and central to the society and the politics at large. There's also a caste structure within this world. There are people of noble blood and lesser blood, and while military and being a part of the military is expected in this society, there's still only so much movement one can have from being lesser to noble. And our main character Tao is part of the lesser caste, so essentially there is a ceiling no matter how hard he works that he will ultimately hit, and sort of there's no movement beyond that. There's also magic within this world. There's essentially individuals called the gifted. They're always women, which I thought was a really interesting element to the story. And they can essentially utilize like energy to either incapacitate enemies by making them see things and like not want to fight, or to enrage a male warrior to become like super big and strong and really powerful on the battlefield. In the beginning of the story, our main character Tao essentially has interest in being in the military as it's expected, but he honestly doesn't really want to be that involved. He really just wants to settle down, get married, have kids, be around his family, stay in his village, and just kind of like serve his time and then leave. But at the beginning of this book, an unexpected event occurs that kind of turns Tao's life upside down and changes his path to one of revenge, where he vows to become the greatest swordman, to essentially kill off all the individuals who were responsible for the event that occurred at the beginning of this book. This is very much a story centering around Tao and following Tao as he gets involved in the military, and there is lots and lots and lots of training. I really want to highlight that because if you don't like military or training sequences, you might find the pacing of this book to be a little bit tricky. Personally, I found them to be, for the most part, very entertaining, and only at the middle part did I get a little bit slow, but I would say Evan Winters was able to really reintroduce stakes for a lot of these training exercises, particularly with this competition that exists within this book that I found to be very interesting. And actually reading Combat, written by Evan Winters, I thought was also really well done. Evan Winters' writing really flows very well, and his ability to write combat I actually was really impressed by. Moving into the issues that I generally had with this book is, while I found the world to be incredibly fascinating and watching Tao kind of maneuver within it, I loved a lot. Tao as a main character is hyper focused on revenge, which personally didn't bother me so much as that he is a human being, and ultimately human beings can get really focused on things, often to the detriment of people around them that they care about. To me, this just made Tao feel very human, and I imagine he'll have continual character growth throughout the rest of the series. But for me, kind of where this book could have done a bit better and maybe benefited from a multi-perspective was the world itself. I found the politics and the magic incredibly interesting, and I felt throughout this entire book Tao was kind of reconciling and also questioning the caste structure of him being a lesser, and kind of realizing that he is so much better often than these nobles due to his hard work. And I felt like that would kind of naturally progress into him also perhaps recognizing that the war that they've been fighting in for 183 years is actually a conflict that is incredibly flawed in itself. In fact, that they themselves might actually be the villains, and the political structure should be maybe questioned and overhauled altogether. And while one was definitely acknowledged, kind of the reflection on the war itself definitely wasn't there. And given that Tao and his people are the colonizers in this situation, I kind of wished there was more acknowledgement or even recognition of that within the larger narrative story. That being said, I do feel like there's opportunity and a likeliness that this will be explored in book 2, which is why I'm definitely going to check it out. I was just a little surprised that it was kind of so instantly focused on Tao and his direct relationship with the kind of the nobles who he deemed as bad, but there were still nobles that he felt were good. And then also like the bad guys were still always the native individuals, and that was never really questioned. That being said, this book had incredible pace. I really did enjoy Tao. The writing style was awesome, and I feel like there's a lot of opportunity to explore this world further in books 2, 3, and 4. I do feel like if this was multi-perspective, a lot of my issues perhaps wouldn't have happened, but overall I did still enjoy this book and would recommend it. I ended up giving it like a 3 out of 5 stars, and I am excited to check out book 2. Next book I'm going to chat about was a bit of a surprise and definitely not on the list to read this month. I basically started reading book 5 and realized I forgot everything, so I was like, well, I guess I just need to reread book 1, and that is The Black Prism by Brent Weeks. This is obviously book 1 to the Lightbringer series, and a reread I'm actually really excited to be tackling right now. I read the first 3 books so many years ago, and then obviously, as I said, when I encountered book 5, I forgot everything. That being said, I really enjoyed reading this from page 1. A lot of my initial feelings about this series definitely stayed true, and honestly, there is reread value for this once you kind of know some political elements that will be expressed in later books. You definitely could see the foreshadowing present even in the first book, which I found really enjoyable as a reader. But all in all, the Lightbringer series is essentially set in a world called the Chromia, and the magic system is based on the spectrum of light. Each color within the spectrum has different kind of abilities and different manifestations. They work differently. But there is a drawback to using power. The more light you draw on, the quicker you die. Honestly, creates a really interesting political impact if your best warriors, if you overuse them, die even if they survive and win the battle. So that is definitely a part of the story as well. There's also an individual in this world called the Prism who is the most powerful, and that is because he can control every color within the light spectrum and use as much as he needs without actually being impacted and killed off. He is politically powerful, but more of a figurehead, and kind of works with other individuals within the Chromia, including a council, as well as individuals called the White and the Black. This is actually a multi-perspective story. So while we follow the Prism's perspective, we also follow his illegitimate son, Kip, who is kind of our primary character, and we follow him at the beginning of this book, finding out that he is the son of the Prism and basically thrown from his small town to the heart of Chromia politics. And you learn a lot of drafting as well as kind of the structure of the world through him. Kip as a main character, I really enjoyed reading from his perspectives. I feel like as I've gotten older, I appreciate and care much for his POV, maybe more than I did when I read it when I was younger. Kip is 15 in this first novel. He comes from a very troubled home. Because of this, he's incredibly hard on himself, uses humor and kind of deflects what he assumes will be insults by other people by speaking them first. So he's constantly putting himself down, but I am really excited to see Kip, one, gain more confidence in himself because he's such a lovely kid and you just want him to like see that himself and root for himself. And I know throughout this series you kind of see him get more powerful and become more comfortable within the political schemes of the Chromia. You also follow Liv and Karis, who are 2 incredible female characters that I love so much. One is a blackguard and one is essentially a spy. Book 2 is just really fast paced, and as you jump from all these different perspectives, the chapters are really short. You kind of get all these different viewpoints of the world and different angles of how the politics are really simmering and kind of upping the ante. Because of this, I read this book so quickly, and I felt it to be a really strong first book in a fantasy series. Ultimately, I give it probably a 4.5 out of 5. I loved everyone. I would say Gavin the Prism was maybe my least favorite. He's supposed to be like this beloved hero, and he definitely is, but I would say he's maybe a little too perfect looking back and reading back. But that being said, he's still a really enjoyable POV to read from. The world is cool. Politics are just breakneck pace. Really like this a lot. 4.5 stars, would still very much recommend this series. All right, moving into the home stretch. So many books to talk about. The last book I'm just gonna quickly touch on, and that is The Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. This is the first book to the live ship Traders trilogy, which I'm now starting. Now that I finished the Farseer trilogy, I was able to read 200 pages of this before starting this video today, and I'm loving this. This is actually a really interesting contrast to the Farseer trilogy so far. I actually don't know how they connect, and I don't actually think you need to read one before reading the other. I'm personally reading them in order, but tell me if I'm wrong in the comments below. The reason why this is contrasting the Farseer trilogy so much, besides just the general content, which is very much centered around like piracy and trading and ships and the ocean and port towns, is that it's multi-perspective. And so far, there has been a lot of different perspective versus the Farseer trilogy. You're definitely rooted in just Fitz POV for the most part. You're sitting and growing up with one specific character, but this, so many perspectives, I'm actually enjoying it a lot, and it creates a sort of larger world. You can kind of see all the different machinations begin to kind of unfurl, and I'm liking it a lot. It's kind of interesting to see a more expansive multi-POV fantasy story from Robin Hobb, and her writing in this one I feel like immediately engaged me. I've never cared more about trading and trade routes in my entire life, but yeah, I'm loving this. It definitely captured me right away, and I'm really curious to see how this connects with the Farseer trilogy, if they even do connect, if it's just in subtle ways, I am not sure. But so far, so good with this. I'm liking it a lot, and I'm excited to continue to read this into the next month. The last book I read this month was Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and this is a work of nonfiction and is actually a memoir by the author himself, written in the format of a letter to his son. Honestly, this book is kind of tricky to talk about in that it felt while reading it probably one of the most personal pieces of writing I have ever encountered in my life. So really critiquing it or offering any kind of insight from me feels pointless. That being said, I would highly implore anyone and everyone to pick up this book. And also, if you have the opportunity to listen to the audiobook, I would really recommend that, as it's actually narrated by the author himself. This, though, was truly one of the most touching and deeply moving pieces of writing I've honestly ever encountered. It is definitely short, but one that will really stay with you for a long time. As I said, this is written in the format of a letter from the author to his son, and in it he kind of goes through and examines his own life, as well as speaks directly to his son about the impact of being Black in America, how America has built an empire on the falsehoods of the idea of race, and how this has most heavily fallen on the bodies of Black individuals in America. In this, he kind of attempts to answer some of these questions, as well as talk through his and his son's place in the world. And again, this is truly a book I would recommend anyone to read and pick up, and also if you're able to get to the audiobook, I would really recommend that as well. And I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Alrighty guys, those are all the books I read for the month of August. Let me know down below some books you've read recently, as I would love to know, and I will see you guys soon with another video soon.